This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Right behind the roof.
Okay, Bruchim Abbaim. Welcome everyone. Poischen b'chvayt achsanya. I want to begin by thanking Rabbi Feldhammer V'Rayasai for opening up their home and their backyard to host this venue and a beautiful program and Shiur. And we know the Shlag Kadosh tells us that the greatest form of chesed is Hachnasas Orchim. And the reason why Hachnasas Orchim is the greatest form of chesed is because the purpose of chesed is to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The greatest emulation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to open up one's home to guests, because that's what the Rebbeinu Shalom does to us. Hashem created the world. This world is Hashem's home. And Hashem opens up His home, and He feeds us, and He houses us, and He takes care of all of our needs. So by housing other people, by being machnes orchim, this is the greatest emulation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we could be moisef. You know, when was the greatest all-time achnasas orchim? In Gan Eden Mikedem, in the Garden of Eden. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, what was it like in the Garden of Eden? It says, Malachi Ashares, Soilen loy basar, Masanin loy yayin. The Malachim were grilling, they were barbecuing. So really the greatest achnasas orchim is a barbecue. So we're Mavarich, Abel and his wife. They should always be able to open up their home for Torah, for Chesed, and it should be a bayis, Molei, Bracha, V'Hatzlacha, Abiyas Gal Tzedek. Okay, so we're going to speak about the Yom HaKadosh, Lag BaOmer. And we know that it's customary, especially in Eretz Yisrael, especially if you're up in the north. For many, many centuries, the Minhag Yisrael was to make the pilgrimage to go to the kever of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron. In fact, the Arizal, it's recorded in the Shara Kavanos, written by Reb Chaim Vital, that Reb Chaim Vital already transcribes and already records the Minhag to go on Lag BaOmer to the kever of the Rashbi and the kever of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's son, who, of course, we know they're buried in Meron, and we eat there, you drink there. And in fact, Reb Chaim Vital reports, I saw that Arizal go there. He went to Meron on Lag BaOmer. He spent 3 days there, and Reb Chaim Vital says, you know, one thing I'm not sure about, was this before the Arizal became proficient in Kabbalah? Was it after the Arizal became proficient in Kabbalah? And then the Reb Chaim Vital records a tradition that's actually brought in the Ber Heitev, and it's brought in the Teres Zakenim on the Shulchan Aruch. And that is, says Reb Chaim Vital, Reb Avram Halevi testified that he himself saw the Arizal go to Meron, and Reb Avram Halevi was there with him. And the custom of Reb Avram Halevi is every day in the Shemana Esrei, when he got up to the bracha of Yushalayim Ercha Brachim Tashav, he would say Nachem. Now, when do we say Nachem? Nachem, we say it on Tisha B'Av, but we don't say it any other time. But the custom of Rabbi Avram Halevi, he was always mourning, he always lamented Churban Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it was his custom to say Nachem every day of the year. And he came to the kever of the Rashbi, and as usual, he said Nachem in V'Yushalayim Ercha. Whereupon, what?
What does Rashbi have to do with the Madura?
What is he? I don't know. Good question. What do you have to do with the Madura?
Why do we do it?
Oh, why do we do Madura? Excellent question. Why? Maybe we'll talk about that. But anyway, back to the program. So Rabbi Avram Halevi, he's at the kever of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and he says a nachem during the Shemana Esrei. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai comes out of his kever. The Arizal says, the Arizal saw the Rashbi come out of his kever and say to Rabbi Avram Halevi the following: Lama Omar Nachem b'yom simchasenu. Why would you say Nachem on our day of joy? And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said, you will be benachama b'karev, meaning you will suffer a loss very soon, and you will need consolation. So, and not even a month passed, Rabbi Avram Halevi's son passed away, and he had to be Makabel Tanchumen. Says Reb Chaim Vital, I'm writing this to demonstrate, to show the world that there's a very important root in Lag BaOmer. It's a day of Simcha, especially because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, whose Simcha is on Lag BaOmer, and therefore, says Reb Chaim Vital, don't think Lag BaOmer is some kind of made-up day. No, from this story we see there's something legitimate to Lag BaOmer. Rabbi said we see 3 things from the story. Number 1, we see somehow Lag BaOmer is the day of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's Simcha, because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was disturbed by the fact that Rav Rama Levi was saying Nachem. Number two, we see, don't you dare say Nachem on Lag BaOmer. If you say Nachem on Lag BaOmer, oy va'avoy, woe to you. And the third thing we see is, here Rav Chaim Vital is trying to say, what's special about Lag BaOmer? And he does everything, but he stops short of saying Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. This would be the perfect opportunity to say, what's Lag BaOmer? It's the yahrzeit of the Rashbi. This is the chance. This is where in the Kisvei Ari it's written that there's something called Lag BaOmer. And what does he say? Lag BaOmer is a Yom Simcha. It's a day of Reb Shimon's Simcha. It's a day that Rabbi Akiva trained 5 Talmidim. Why doesn't Reb Chaim Vital say this is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit? If it's very conspicuously absent, this idea, this notion, and if it's even true, as we're about to see, is today in fact the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So in the Siddur of the Arizal, it's called the Siddur of Reb Shapsi. The Siddur Arizal was written by a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and he writes that there's a mitzvah to go to the kever of the Rashbi. So we're going to have to deal with that. You know, we Jews, we like to do mitzvahs. So how are we going to be Mekayim this Inyan that there's a mitzvah to go to the kever of the Rashbi on Lag BaOmer? How are we going to be Mekayim this mitzvah? He adds, don't say Nachem. He adds, the Arizal went to Meron and he stopped short, and he does not say that. We'll catch the next train to him, right? He stopped short. It's part of the effects. Put the camera. He does everything but say that Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. The Mishnas Chasidim. Anybody know who wrote the Mishnas Chasidim? Mishnas Chasidim is like a summary of the Eitz Chaim. It's written by Rav Emanuel Chai Riki. He also writes, Lag BaOmer is a simcha. It's the simcha of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. We are not misabel on Churban Beis Hamikdash on Lag BaOmer. You don't want to get punished by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And if you live in Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah to go to Meron. In fact, there's an amazing report. Rav Shmuel Heller wrote a kuntris about the practices of Lag BaOmer called kuntris Kavod Malachim. And Rav Shmuel Heller reports that he heard that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, who's the Orach Chaim HaKadosh? Reb Chaim Ibn Atar. When he one year had the opportunity to go to Meron, and he starts off on the bottom of the mountain, and he gets off the donkey. Reb Chaim Ibn Atar gets off the donkey, and he stands up, and then he gets down on all four, on his hands and his knees. This is Reb Chaim Ibn Atar, Orach Chaim HaKadosh. And he starts crawling to the kever of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai like a chamor himself. And he says, who am I? I'm a shafal, I'm a nimvaz. Who am I to even go up to the kever of the Rashbi? And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh started to cry like a behema and be tzoyek. The Ribono Shel Olam's at the kever of the Rashbi. All the malachim are at the kever of the Rashbi. All the neshamas of the tzaddikim are at the kever of the Rashbi. And this is a report we have. So we see even the greatest of all personalities went out of their way and made the great trek to the top of the mountain of Meron, and they made sure to be on Lag BaOmer at the kever of Shimon Bar Yochai. So the question is, what do we do? We live in the holy city of Cedarhurst, or maybe where are we now? Cedarhurst. We're in Cedarhurst. Yeah. Okay, we're still in Cedarhurst, but still it's not Meron. And yet here we see the Orach Chaim HaKadosh crawled literally on all four up the mountain to be zoicha, to be at the kever of the Rashbi. So there's an amazing sefer written by Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. Rabbi Hillel, one of the leading Mekubalim today, he wrote a sefer on Lag BaOmer called Eid Hagal Hazeh. And he writes, if somebody is nenas, you have extenuating circumstances, or you're far away, or you live in America, and you live in the Gullus, and you can't make it to the kever of the Rashbi on Lag BaOmer, what should you do? Yesh takana. And that is, if you learn the Zohar HaKadosh, you learn about the greatness of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, if you learn about the greatness of Lag BaOmer, then we have a principle based on the Gemara Menachos. The same way there's a concept in a Shalma of Purim Sefasenu, which means if you can't bring a carbon, if you learn about a carbon, it's as if you brought a carbon. So too, if you can't go to Meron, if you learn about Meron, you learn about the Rashbi, you learn about the Zohar, then you're virtually transported. It's as if you're in Meron. In fact, the Yushalmi says that for a tzaddik, you don't need to make a matzeva. The words of a tzaddik are their matzeva. The neshama of the tzaddik is nignaz in his divrei Torah. And therefore, if we're Zoichet to learn a little bit about Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, then it's like we're standing there at the Tzion. It's like we're at his Matzeva. Unbelievably, who is the Baal HaMemra? Who's the one who says that when a person says over Divrei Torah in the name of a tzaddik, the lips of the tzaddik are whispering in his kever, Sivsoisav Shel Tzaddik, Doivevois Bekever. Who says this teaching? This is a teaching of Shimon Bar Yochai Yevamis. Kol Talmid Chacham She'oimrim Dvar Shmua Mipiv Ba'olam Hazeh Sivsoisav Doivevois Bekever. So if we're able to say over from the Rashbi, so it's like the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is here, we're at his kever, and the benefits are, if there are any kohanim, so you could still be at the kever of the Rashbi. You don't have to be matame. You learn about the Rashbi. We're virtually transported to the kever of Shimon Bar Yochai, and all the skulais and the makom ratzain and the makom kadosh. We're there. We're right there, and we hope then, and on this occasion, learning about Shimon Bar Yochai, it should be an opportunity that all of our tefillah should be neskabel. We should be able to use it to be payal Yeshuas for all of us and for all of Klal Yisrael. So I want to share with you that Rav Asher Weiss in his Sichos Minchas Asher, he also brings down that the Kloisenberger Rebbe also followed this practice, that every Leil Lag BaOmer he had a tish, and he said over from the Chidushim of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and the Torah of Shimon Bar Yochai, and this he says is a skula nefla, it's keilu you're a mishtateach on the kever of the Rashbi. Okay, so let's begin as follows. Is tonight the yard side of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai? I know that's what they told you in yeshiva. I know you grew up your whole life thinking that Lag BaOmer is the yard side of the Rashbi. Who decided that? Who said that? Where do we know this from? It doesn't say it in Shas, it doesn't say it in the Shulchan Aruch, and it doesn't say it in the Zohar. However, we know on the last day of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's life, a small compendium was written called the Idra, and the Idra ends that the bear, B-I-E-R, the bed of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was sort of being elevating to Shemayim. What is it called when something floats in the air? What is it? Levitation. Yeah, it started levitating and rising up to the heavens, to the heavens, to the heavens, and it was followed by a fire. And at that point, a heavenly voice cried out, "Gather for the Hilula of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai." Now, Hilula sounds like something happy. We don't know exactly what Hilula means. Is it Lashon Halal? And actually, it's a subject in and of itself. What does Hilula mean? But this is the closest source that we have that the Petira of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was a happy occasion. That the Idra says that upon the demise of the Rashbi, as his body was floating up to Shamayim, a heavenly voice cried out, "Enjoy, come and gather for the great Hilul of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai." This is the Makar. Interestingly, it doesn't say he passed away on Lag BaOmer. It doesn't say it should be a Yom Simcha. And even if Hilula means it should be a happy day, maybe only that day that he died. But how do you know every year on that calendar date you should continue to celebrate? This is the only Makar that we have, which is not a Makar even. It doesn't say it was Lag BaOmer. It doesn't say it's a Yom Tif. It doesn't even say to be happy. But somehow, based on this, it became accepted in Klal Yisrael, A, that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on this date, B, therefore it's a happy date, and C, somehow we make a Yom Tov out of it. But how do we extrapolate based on the fact that the Idra said that a voice cried out, "Come and gather for the Hilula of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai"? How do we know it was Lag BaOmer? Who said it was Lag BaOmer? Maybe it was could be any of the other 364 days. Nobody says anything for 1500 years. It doesn't say anywhere that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai comes Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in the 18th century. Okay, that's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter in the 2nd century. Comes the Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. He says we know that when tzaddikim pass away, the malachim want to take their neshama. Lag BaOmer is the Hilula of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and when his neshama went up to Shamayim, they rejoiced in Shamayim. And therefore, every God-fearing person should do tshuva on Lag BaOmer, and there's a chus of the Rashbi. The Rashbi's neshama will assist the person to do tshuva. So there's something obviously missing here. In the 2nd century, when the Idra was recorded, it doesn't say anything. Not for 1500 years do we have that finally Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is niftar on Lag BaOmer. Comes Reb Tzadok HaKohen 100 years ago. Reb Tzadok HaKohen wrote an amazing sefer called Poiker Ikarim. It's about Pshuta Kamashmai, about people waiting to have children, Hashem visiting them with children. He writes that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was Zoicha to great revelations, and he was, the Gemara in Gittin says that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai said, learn my midos, learn my Torah. I am the truma of Rabbi Akiva. Says Reb Tzadok HaKohen that on Lag BaOmer, which is Yoima de Hilula, that's when the root of Torah Shabbal Peh became revealed to the world. So he just mentions Agavorcha that Lag BaOmer is the Yoima de Hilula of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Comes the Chida. Chida wrote like a sort of a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch called Moira Be'etzma, and the Chida writes in the Moira Be'etzma that on Lag BaOmer you should rejoice, you should be marba b'simcha. We know Reb Shimon Bar Yochai wants us to rejoice on Lag BaOmer, and you should gather together with a minyan, and you should learn Shivchei Rashbi, and you should learn the Zayar and the Idrazuta. So the Chida records this tradition that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter on Lag BaOmer, and he brings this down again in the Berkei Yosef. So somehow, even though there doesn't seem to be an early source that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer, but the Achronim, sort of starting only a few hundred years ago, bring down that there's such a tradition. But here's where it gets a little complicated. Comes the Chida in the Sefer Maras Ha'ayin, and he brings down Yesh Misha Omer, that on Lag BaOmer, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai passed away. Is that a Rafalowitz? Daniel, is that you? I can't see you. Hakol Kol Daniel. Yeah? But the Chida writes that even though some say that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away in Lag BaOmer, that's what's written in the Pri Eitz Chaim. But says the Chida, it is well known that the writings of Rav Chaim Vital and the Arizal are very corrupted, which means we don't have a clear girsa, we don't have an accurate girsais. The most accurate text, says the Chida, of the Kisei Ari are the 8 Shiurim of Rav Shmuel Vital. And in the writings of Rav Shmuel Vital, nothing is written about the fact that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. He talks about how Rabbi Akiva taught 5 Talmidim. He talks about how Rabbi Akiva and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai are the shoyresh of the Torah Shabbal Peh. He talks about how the Rashbi celebrates on Lag BaOmer. But he doesn't say anything about the fact that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. So this Chida is a very big controversy, because the simple reading of the Chida is he's being incredulous of the tradition that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. He's saying that whatever sources say that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer are not accurate, and the most accurate sources don't say he passed away on Lag BaOmer. He seems to then be saying we have no indication or proof that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. That seems to be the simple way to read the Chida. But in the contemporary Svarim, they're not comfortable reading the Chida like that. Obviously not, because that sort of dismisses the whole notion that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer, and therefore the way they understand the Chida is that Chas v'Shalom, the Chida is not questioning that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer. He's just saying the fact that the Pri Eitz Chaim says that he passed away on Lag BaOmer is not conclusive, since the text in the Pri Eitz Chaim is not an accurate text. But Avada, we're not going to question the Messiah of Klal Yisrael. But if you actually have an honest reading of the Chida, he doesn't really seem to be saying that. He seems to be asking that why would the accurate text of the Kisei Ari mention every little detail about Lag BaOmer and stop short of saying it's his yahrzeit. But we're not here today to question whether it's the yahrzeit of Shimon Bar Yochai. Just for your own Yediyas HaTorah, you should know that this is something that we don't have a Makar Neman for. We don't have a very clear source that he was nifter on this day, but this seems to be the widespread Masar in Klal Yisrael. And based on that, the Achronim asked the following question. This is the question of Chassam Sofer, and the Shar Lameshav takes it to the nth degree. Comes the Chassam Sofer, and the Chassam Sofer is talking about the earthquakes that destroyed the city of Tzfas in the beginning of the 19th century. We know in the beginning of the 19th century, they were a very big and prestigious community in Tzfas, and they were ravaged by earthquakes. Many of the shuls were destroyed. Many Yidden died in these earthquakes. And the Chassam Sofer was asked, please, Rebbe, Rabban Shel Kol Bnei Agoyla, please explain, why did these earthquakes ravage the city of Tzfas? And the Chassam Sofer said very powerfully and very frighteningly that since the time Jews began to return to Eretz Yisrael, from the times of the early Mikubalim, from the times of Talmidei Baal Shem, Talmidei Hagra, everyone's going to the north. Everyone's going to Tzfas, because Ari was in Tzfas, and the Ramak was in Tzfas, and everyone's going to Meron. And the city of Yerushalayim, the center of the earth, where the world was created from, where all tefillos go up to Shamayim from, where Noach built the Mizbeach, where Yaakov Avinu slept on the Harabayas, which is the gateway of heaven, where the Shechina always resides by the Kosel Maravi, Yerushalayim is forsaken ka'almana. And therefore when Yerushalayim saw the attention Tzfas was getting, like a jealous co-wife, Yerushalayim destroyed the city of Tzfas. That's the frightening comments of the Chassam Sofer. Says the Chassam Sofer, I would advise everyone going to Eretz Yisrael to go to Yerushalayim, not to go anywhere else. Yerushalayim is the center of the universe. But says the Chassam Sofer, to go to Tzfas, to go to Meron on Lag BaOmer, leave me out of it. I wouldn't do that, to forsake Yerushalayim. What kind of holiday is it? What are you celebrating? You're celebrating that Rashbi died? I mean, last I checked, we're sad when people die. I mean, even in Judaism, usually, even though, there became this custom to drink alcohol when people die, but the reason why, I'll tell you where did it come from. Why do you drink alcohol when people die? Because the Shulchan Aruch says, what do you do when somebody dies? And especially a tzaddik. What do you do when Chas v'Shalom a relative passes away? You fast. What do you do when a tzaddik passes away? What do you do Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the death of Nadav Avihu? You're supposed to fast, the Shulchan Aruch says. What do you do on the 10th day of Nisan, the death of Miriam? The Shulchan Aruch writes Siman Tuf Kuf Pei, you need to fast. What do you do on the 26th day of Nisan, the death of Yeshua ben Nun? You need to fast. What do you do on the 25th day of Sivan, the death of Shimon Gamliel and Shmuel Kohen Gadol? You fast. What do you do on the death of Eli? You fast. What is Zayin Adar? Zayin Adar is a fast day because Moshe Rabbeinu died. Ask the Chassam Sofer, last I checked, you fast when a tzaddik dies. By the way, where did it come from to drink alcohol on a yard site? You're supposed to fast on a yard site. Elamai niskatnu hadoros, we're not able to fast. So they used to make a siyum to be able to eat. And by the siyum they would drink alcohol. Niskatnu hadoros, nobody could learn anything anymore. But alcohol they could still drink. That's what's brought down. Where do you think it comes from? The neshama has an aliyah when a person imbibes alcohol. The neshama has an aliyah when a person learns a masechta. So says the Chassam Sofer, what kind of Yom Tif is it celebrating the yahrzeit of a tzaddik? The yahrzeit of a tzaddik is a Yom Tainus, is a Yom Avelos. Comes the Shoel Umeshiv and he takes the question even further. He says, in my humble opinion, there's no way the Arizal and Tzfas did what they do today. Especially, asked the Shoel Umeshiv, they're burning clothing there in Tzfas. It's an ancient custom to burn clothing. Ancient custom? It's an Isser Dairaisa about Tashchis. It's an Isser Dairaisa of Darkei Amoiri. You're not to burn clothing. They only would be allowed to burn clothing when a king died. His clothing were not allowed to be used, so there's no Baal Tashchis if you burn it. So they were allowed to burn his clothing. But to burn clothing in Tzfas? How could you do such a thing? But says the Shoel Umeshiv, you think I'm going to say anything to Jews who think that what they're doing is a mitzvah? Anytime Jews think something is a mitzvah, don't bother stopping them because they'll never listen to you. They think it's a mitzvah. If they would only know it's two lavin in the Torah. If it would be up to me, I would advise them, instead of taking their clothing and burning it, sell the clothing on eBay or the equivalent and give all the money to tzedakah. I'm sure, says the Shoel Umeshiv, Reb Shimon Yochai would be much happier if you gave the money to tzedakah than if you burnt clothing in a bonfire. Okay?
How did the meaning of the bonfire start?
The meaning of the bonfire?
Yeah.
Sender asked that already. So whatever I said to him, I repeat to you, okay?
What's that?
Okay. So that's the question. The question on the table is, but the minhag in Klal Yisrael is Lag BaOmer is certainly a very joyous day. It's one of the most joyous days of the years in Eretz Yisrael, and the celebration seems to be connected with the Yoma Hilula of Rav Shimon bar Yochai. So the question stands is the question of Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer brings this in his drashos. He brings this in the Torahs Moshe. I believe he brings it in the Tshuvos, Reish Lamed Gimel. And the question is, Marav Rabbi, why would we mourn the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu, who the Shoel Umeshiv says was the greatest man who ever lived, and rejoice over the Patira of Reb Shimon bar Yochai? This is the question on the table. This is what we hope to discuss this evening. So the first answer It was given in the Shas Teshuvah Shem Aryeh. A very fascinating approach. How did Reb Shimon Yochai get to the cave? You know, a man like him, they should give him a nice house to live in. He should have a gabbai, and a tish gabbai, a hoiz gabbai. He should have all the works. What's he doing living in a cave? So we know there was a conversation, and Yehuda ben Gerim said the Romans are great, and Reb Shimon Yochai said they do everything for themselves. So Reb Shimon Yochai, they heard what he said, and Reb Shimon Yochai had to flee. And he ran into a cave for 12 years, and he came out, and they were burning everyone up, so they came back into the cave, and they came out again after a year, and the Gzeira was batal, and Reb Shimon Yochai lived the rest of his life b'toiv, u'v'shalom, and the decree was abolished. What chas v'shalom would have happened if the Romans were successful in taking retribution to Reb Shimon Yochai? So he would have been from the Harugei Malchus chas v'shalom. And we know from many places in Shas that Harugei Malchus are not given kfura. They're not buried. Now when Shimon Bar Yochai came out of the cave, he said that since a miracle happened to me, I'm going to do what Yaakov Avinu did. When Yaakov Avinu was saved from Esav, he minted coins, the Gemara says. So I'm going to make a takana, I'm gonna mark off kfarim, and I'm gonna make tikkun ha'olam. I'm gonna do something for society. It's interesting that the Kloisenberger Rebbe, when he was saved from the Holocaust, he took a Kabbalah on himself. And what was his Kabbalah? His Kabbalah was to build Laniado Hospital, to build a hospital, which people are, mafli. Here is a great God of Israel. This is his takana, this is his Kabbalah. But you see in the Gemara that when a miracle happens to somebody, there's a special inyan to make a contribution to society at large, to mint a coin, to benefit society, not just in Ruchnias. So, Mistama, following that ideal, the Kloisenberger Rebbe also made such a Kabbalah. So what do we see from here? Says the Shem Aryeh, really a brilliant thought, that the Chassam Sofer asks, what kind of Yom Tif is Lag BaOmer? No miracle happened on Lag BaOmer. Yeah, a miracle happened. You know what the miracle is? That Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's life was saved. So when do you think we should celebrate the fact that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's life was saved? When people realize his life was saved. When would somebody realize Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's life was saved? Perhaps on the day that he died a natural death. So we wait until his yahrzeit, and on his yahrzeit we're celebrating the fact that it could have been very terrible. It could have been, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai could have been cut down in the prime of his life. It could be he was never given l'kvura. So what do? We wait till his yahrzeit, then people remember and they're cognizant of the fact that he was not murdered by the Romans. He lived a regular life. He died a natural death. And he's even given l'kfura, he's given a Jewish burial. So this highlights the great miracle that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's life was saved. The death of Moshe Rabbeinu is tragic, like the death of any tzaddik. The death of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai puts into focus the great miracle that happened, that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's life was saved and he wasn't murdered by the Romans. That's the first approach and the first distinction between the Rashbi and Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the answer of Shas Teshuvas Shem Aryeh. Next answer, Hilula Rabbah. Hilula Rabbah is like a Kabbalistic work about Lag BaOmer. And he brings a very interesting idea. He brings a concept that the Rashbi was some kind of nitzutz of Moshe Rabbeinu, a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. And there are different ramazim to this. For example, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shamayim, it says, Shavisa Shevi. Shevi is Rashi Tevos Shimon Bar Yochai. Fine. Now when Moshe Rabbeinu died, it was very tragic. You know why it was so tragic? Because Moshe Rabbeinu had such a burning desire to accomplish something that he was never able to accomplish. What did Moshe Rabbeinu want? He wanted to enter Eretz Yisrael. And Hashem said, no, you can't enter Eretz Yisrael. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu as follows. Hashem said, Ata loy savar. Loy savar is gematria Shimon Bar Yochai. You're not going to go into Eretz Yisrael. But your spark and your nitzutz will enter Eretz Yisrael. So the death of Moshe is tragic because Moshe never entered Eretz Yisrael. But the death of the Rashbi has a sort of redeeming quality to it. That what Moshe never accomplished, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai did accomplish. So we're rejoicing that Moshe ultimately entered the land. We're rejoicing that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai entered the land. It's interesting, in V'zos HaBracha it says, Vayitmu yemei b'chi evel Moshe. The days of mourning for Moshe concluded. The gematria of Vayitmu yemei b'chi is Shimon Bar Yochai. Meaning, when did the Avelis for Moshe Rabbeinu end? Through the Rashbi, through Shimon Bar Yochai. In fact, Avel, Vayitmu Yimei Avel, Vayitmu Yimei B'chi Avel, Avel is Gematria Lamed Gimel. In other words, the mourning for Moshe Rabbeinu concluded on what day? Concluded on Lag BaOmer. So that's the contrast between Moshe Rabbeinu and Shimon Bar Yochai. Moshe Rabbeinu was never Zoicha to enter Eretz Yisrael, so that explains why the celebration for the Rashbi is primarily in Eretz Yisrael, and primarily at his kever, so to speak. The Avelus for Moshe Rabbeinu concluded with the entering of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai into Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Every shiur has to have a good munkatcher, right? Yeah, what was that? Yossi, I see you in the back, right? The Bnei Yissaschar, no. The Bnei Yissaschar was a descendant of the El Tazeda. The Shar Yissaschar. Okay, good enough from Sender.
Close.
The Shar Yissaschar says like this. He's bothered by the kasha, again the kasha of Chassam Sofer, the kasha of the Shalom Eshev, that why is the Petira of Moshe Rabbeinu a sad day, a day of Avelus, and the Petira of the Rashbi, a day of great joy. So he says a Pashat Azach. All joy, all happiness for the Jewish people comes from where? Comes from the Torah. Kudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Lev. And the antithesis by the opposite, all Avelus, stems from the lack thereof of Torah. That's why the Yimei Sfira are days of Avelus. We lost all the Torah of the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. It's very interesting. Let's talk about the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. What happened the day that Moshe Rabbeinu died? 300 halachas were forgotten. 1,000 halachas were forgotten. So at the end of the day, when Moshe passed away, was there more Torah on that day, or was there less Torah on that day? There was less Torah on that day, so therefore it's a day of sadness. But we know on the day of the Rashbi's Petira, was there more Torah on that day, or was there less Torah on that day? There was more Torah. The Idra Zuta was taught on that day. That was the day Rav Shimon Bar Yochai brought down to the world many of the great secrets of the Torah. That's why the Rashbi is called Baitzina Kadisha, the holy fire. It used to be a little holier, but that's why the Rashbi is called the holy flame. That's the Indian of the bonfires. I told you I'd get to it. That's the Indian of the bonfires on Lag BaOmer. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is called Baitzina Kadisha, the holy flame. So therefore, on the day of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's Petira, there was more Torah in the world. So when Moshe Rabbeinu passes away, it's a day of Avelus, because there was less Torah in the world. When the Rashbi passes away, it's a day of Simcha, because there was more Torah in the world. In fact, the Munkatcher adds that it says in the end of Zos HaBracha, Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Lo yuchal oid latzeis v'lavai." I can no longer engage in debating Torah. Chazal say the well springs of Torah were closed off to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of his Petira. So we see the channels from Shamayim to Aretz of Torah were closed on the day of Moshe's Petira. Mashein came on the day of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's Petira. The well springs of Torah were wide open. Torah proliferated throughout the whole world, and therefore it's a day of rejoicing. Okay. Any Sanzer Hasidim here today? No. Where's the Sachi Halbrand? He's listening. He's listening, right? So the Divrei Chaim says like this. The Kloisenberger Rebbe quotes the Zayda Divrei Chaim. Divrei Chaim said as follows. Divrei Chaim said there's a difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. I would be very afraid to say this. I'm even afraid to say over what he said, but I'm just saying over what he said. He says as follows. Says the Heilige Divrei Chaim that Moshe Rabbeinu, kafi, the godless of his neshama, I don't even know what this means, he was not able to complete everything he wanted to complete because he didn't enter Eretz Yisrael. But the Rashbi, kafi, his shayresh haneshama, was able to be mashlim whatever was humanly possible. That's the pshat we say in the Pizmain, Nasa Adam Nemar Bavurecha. When God said, "Let us make man," he was talking about the Rashbi. That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom had in mind. So again, that's another distinction between the Petira of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was a sad day, a day of Avelus, and the Petira of the Rashbi. Okay, we now come to the penultimate, that means second to last, offering of the evening. And that is Shaus Teshuvas Mayim Chayim. I'm not sure which Shaus Teshuvas Mayim Chayim this is from. And Lefi Ani Ez Daiti, it's not such a compelling answer, but let's say it over regardless. And he says as follows. The Gemara says in Sukkah that in this world, there are not so many people who are B'nai Aliyah. Yeah, they're Jews who keep mitzvahs and learn, but B'nai Aliyah, people who want to grow. Ra'isi b'nei aliyah v'hem mu'atim. There are very few people who try to grow in this world. So Rav Shimon Yochai said, if there are 1,000 people in this world who are looking to grow, me and my son, we're 2 out of the 1,000. And if there are 10 people or 100 people who want to grow in this world, me and my son are 2 out of 100. And if there are only 2 people who want to grow in this world, me and my son are the 2 people. Okay, very interesting. So the Mayim Chaim says like this. There's a concept that the reason why when a tzaddik passes away, it's the day of Avelus, is because who could replace him? There's nobody equal to him. But Rav Shimon Yochai himself said that his son is equal to him. So the day of his patira was tempered by the fact that he left a son like him. Okay, would that explain why it's such a great day of celebration? What's everybody getting so worked up on? But eventually, Reb Shimon passed away also. So what's everybody jumping up and down for and going to a mountain on Lag BaOmer? Oh, because when Shimon died, he left a kid like him. Shkoyach. That's such a happy thing. If that's what gives you your kicks, Okay, Morav Rabbi, now I'm coming to the final answer of the night. What is the difference between the Avelos of Moshe Rabbeinu, the day that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, Zayin Adar, which was a day of great mourning, and the day of the Ptira of the Rashbi? And this answer comes from Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin, and he says a very cryptic answer. And basically, Rav Yaakov Hillel, who we know is one of the Gedolei Yisrael today, one of the Leim Kubalim today, pretty much dedicated a sefer to try to explain this cryptic answer of Rav Tzaddik HaKohen. And Rav Tzaddik HaKohen, at the end of Parshas Emor, on something called Lag BaOmer, it's nice that Rabbi Feynman came to tonight also, Lag BaOmer, and he calls it Lag BaOmer and the Siyam HaShas. This is what Rav Tzaddik HaKohen says. He says as follows: Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, it's a very sad day. The truth is, says Rav Tzaddik HaKohen, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, all the days that are commemorated as fast days for the death of tzaddikim, they're all tzaddikim who are part of Torah Shebechsav. Moshe Rabbeinu, Yoshua ben Nun, Eli HaKohen, Shmuel HaNavi, Miriam HaNaviya. None of the Chachamim that we fast on the day that they passed away are sages in the Mishnah or the Gemara. They're all Chachamim in Torah Shebechsav. It says in Shulchan Aruch, I believe the 25th day of Sivan is the death of Reb Shimon Gamliel. No, we're not fasting that he died. He was killed by the Romans. We're fasting that he was murdered. We only mourn the loss of the sages of the Torah Shebechsav. But the death of the sages of the Torah Shebal Peh, those are happy days. Which would explain why many Jews sort of make some kind of rejoicing on a yard site. What do you mean a yard site? No, says Reb Tzaddik HaKohen, there's a difference between the Petira of a tzaddik in the Torah Shebechsav and the Petira of a tzaddik in the Torah Shebal Peh. But he doesn't quite explain why. And he continues on. He says, well, if we're supposed to rejoice on the Petira of a tzaddik in the Torah Shebal Peh, what's the root of the Torah Shebal Peh? Who's the root of Torah Shebal Peh? Now the truth is, there are general roots and there are specific roots. The root of Torah Shebechsav is Moshe Rabbeinu. The root of Torah Shebal Peh generally is Aaron HaKohen. Aaron is which midah? Midas Hoid. The midah of Hoid. By the way, what day of Sfira does the midah of Hoid begin? Pesach Sheni is the week of Hoid. So Aaron HaKohen is Torah Shebal Peh, like the pasuk says, Ki malach Torah yivakesh mipihu, Ki sifsei kohen yishmru das, the lips of the kohen, the lips, Torah Shebal Peh, Torah yivakesh mipihu. Aaron HaKohen is the root of Torah Shebal Peh. But what's the root of Torah Shebal Peh? The Zohar says, who's really the root of Torah Shebal Peh? Rabbi Akiva. That's well known. Rabbi Akiva is the root of Torah Shebal Peh. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went up to Shamayim, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shamayim and he saw Rabbi Akiva tying the crowns on the Yosiyos. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ribbana Shalom, I don't even understand what he's saying. Mima Akiv al Yodcha, I don't even comprehend what Rabbi Akiva is doing. Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he gave the entire corpus of the Torah, Moshe encompassed Torah Shebechsav. Rabbi Akiva was the root of Torah Shebal Peh. So you'll say, if you're supposed to celebrate the demise of a tzaddik who is from the Torah Shebal Peh, why don't we celebrate the death of Rabbi Akiva? Says Rabbi Tzaddik, we would, but Rabbi Akiva was murdered. So you can't celebrate his death. So who's the root of Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara says in Gittin, that Shimon Bar Yochai said, learn my midas, learn my attributes, learn my qualities. I'm the truma of Rabbi Akiva. So the shoyresh of Torah Shabbat Peh is Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And therefore we celebrate the day of his demise. But Reb Tzadok adds one incredible nakuda, an amazing nakuda. And I think this is something we can all understand. Says Reb Tzadok HaKohen, there's a medrash, it's actually the last Maramokam on the sheet. There's a medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, number 27. The medrash says, on a pasuk in Koheles, Ba'alei Asupais, the master of gatherings. The medrash says, when in our life will our Torah be really implanted in our heart? Everybody learns, everybody tries to integrate the Torah. We all want not just that we learn Torah and it goes in one ear and out the other. We want the Torah to be coursing through our veins. We want the Torah to become part of our personality. When in our life will the Torah really become a part of us? The Medrash says, on the day that the Rebbe passes away, that's when the Torah really becomes part of a person. And there are many ways of explaining this. On a simple level, on a psychological level, the Medrash says, as long as the Rebbe's alive, I don't have to listen so carefully. I don't have to... I'll ask him. If I have a question, I'll ask him. But the moment the Rebbe's not around anymore, what am I going to do? I have to apply myself deeper. But there's also a very deep reason, and that is that so long as the Rebbe is still around, the Rebbe is a Basar V'Dam. The Rebbe is a human being like everybody else. People eat, the Rebbe eats. People breathe, the Rebbe breathes. People sleep, the Rebbe sleeps. People have good midos, bad midos, so does the Rebbe. Nobody's perfect. So, as long as the Rebbe is alive, there's a grain of salt that people sprinkle on everything he says. He's one of us. But once the Rebbe is no longer here, then people realize what they lost out. And everything the Rebbe taught takes on a new meaning and finally enters the blood system of the Talmidim. That's what the Medrash says. This is not like a Kabbalistic teaching. It's not Sifrei Chasidus. This is a Medrash. The Medrash says Torah is integrated into a person's heart on the day the Rebbe passes away. So you say, so then really the death of any tzaddik should be a great day of celebration, because that's the day the Torah was given. The day the Torah is given is the day that the Rebbe leaves this world. So Reb Tzadok HaKohen seems to say that if the tzaddik is a tzaddik of Torah Shebechsav, then the Torah really never filters through the system. I would add, because where is the Torah Shebechsav written? Torah Shebechsav is written on a piece of parchment. And where is the piece of parchment? It's in the Aron Kodesh. And when you take the Sefer Torah, you put it back in the Aron, the Sefer goes in the Aron, and you go home and you go to sleep. The Torah Shebechsav never becomes a part of you like the Torah Shabbat Peh does. But where is the Torah Shabbat Peh written? What's the klaf of the Torah Shabbat Peh? So it says in Mishlei, Kasvei Maluach Libecha. The Torah Shabbat Peh is written on your heart. When is the Torah really going to be written on your heart? When the Rebbe upon the Rebbe's demise. When the Rebbe leaves this world, that's when the Torah really enters a person's system. So the day of the Petira, of the Tzaddikim, of the Torah Shabbat Peh, is a very great day. Especially if that Tzaddik is the root of Torah Shabbat Peh. Now I would add a big chiddush. You ready for this? Whose death should we celebrate more than anybody else in history? Not Moshe, because Moshe is Torah Shebechsav. Whose death should we celebrate more than anyone in history? Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says we can't celebrate his death. Why? Because he was murdered. I say we do celebrate his death. Because when did Rabbi Akiva die? Rabbi Akiva was killed on Yom Kippur. What does the Gemara say? What does the Gemara say about Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the happiest day of the year. Why is Yom Kippur the happiest day of the year? Because finally we're given the Torah on Yom Kippur. Amazingly, the second Luchais were given on Yom Kippur, and the Torah Shabbat Peh was given on Yom Kippur. What Torah Shabbat Peh? The death of Rabbi Akiva. So you say, if the death of Rabbi Akiva is such a prominent part of Yom Kippur, why don't we maybe mention something on Yom Kippur about Rabbi Akiva? We do! Yom Kippur begins with a hesped for Rabbi Akiva. Her zarua la tzadik uli yishrei leiv simcha. Mekubalim say, zarua la tzadik leiv simcha, soifei tevos, Rabbi Akiva. That's the beginning of the day. That's how we kick off the day. Today is the day to celebrate the Patira of Rabbi Akiva. What are we celebrating? It's the day the Torah was finally given to Klal Yisrael. When was it given? When Rabbi Akiva left this world. When it left this world, we celebrate. When Rav Shimon Bar Yochai left this world, we celebrate Lag BaOmer. So let's just conclude with one final thought. Says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, an amazing idea, an amazing thought. When the Ribono Shel Olam gave us, it's good background music. When the Ribono Shel Olam gave us the Torah Shebachsav, what was the reaction of Klal Yisrael? Gezun tehei, no problem, Nasa v'nishma, we're very excited to get the Torah Shebachsav. When the Ribono Shel Olam offered the Torah Shebal Peh to Klal Yisrael, what did Klal Yisrael say? We're not interested. So Hashem basically had to shove it down our throats. He suspended the mountain over our heads like a barrel. He said, either accept it or I'm going to kill you. So we're very uneasy with the Torah Shebal Peh. The Chassam Sofer says Jews love Torah, but not what the rabbis tell them. Because we're very suspicious. Maybe the rabbis have an agenda. Maybe they have a hidden motive. Chassam Sofer says that we don't want it. Nasa v'nishma, God, we trust you. We don't trust the Chachamim. But comes Purim, and Klal Yisrael saw that Mordechai saved their skin, and they realized that without Dinei D'Rabbanan they cannot survive in the Galus. They finally were Makabel the Torah Shebal Peh B'Rachamim U'V'Ratzain. So the real Kabbalas HaTorah of Torah Shebal Peh was when? Purim. But then the Torah Shebal Peh began to be lost. When did it begin to go lost? With the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. But then Rabbi Akiva started again on Lag BaOmer, and he taught Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And the grandeur and the majesty of the Torah Shebal Peh was restored. So the truth is, there were two occasions in our history where we had, so to speak, a commitment to the Torah Shebal Peh. Number one, Purim. Number two, Lag BaOmer. Now we understand the words of the Torah. The Torah writes that Lag BaOmer and Purim will always fall out on the same day of the year. V'simin l'davar, Peleg Elokim olei mayim. Peleg. Peleg. Pei is Purim, Lamed Gimel Lag BaOmer. Purim this year was what day of the week? Thursday. Lag BaOmer, also Thursday. Why? Because we missed the Wednesday night shiur Purim night. We're making it up Lag BaOmer. Okay? But besides that, on a deeper level, there are 2 days a year where the grandeur of the Torah Shebal Peh is raised up. On Purim, we're in Makabel Torah Shebal Peh B'Ratzain, and on Lag BaOmer, we are through the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Torah Shebal Peh started to pulsate through the veins and through the arteries and through the blood of Klal Yisrael. So when you cut open a yid, we're pulsating kihem chayenu v'arich yameinu with the dam of the Torah Shebal Peh. There are 2 days in the calendar that are days celebrating the Torah Shebal Peh. Purim, Lag BaOmer will always come out on the same day of the year, says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. That's the connection between Lag BaOmer and Purim. So we should talk about Zoicha. First, we asked the Kasha. The death of Moshe Rabbeinu was the day of tragedy. The death of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is celebrated b'simcha of rikudim. What's the difference? Number one, the difference is we're celebrating the fact that the Rashbi did not succumb to the Gezerah of the Romans and he was given Kever Yisrael. Number two, we're celebrating that the Rashbi entered Eretz Yisrael, sort of making up for the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu did not enter Eretz Yisrael. We're celebrating the fact that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, upon his demise, Torah was spread to the world. The Idrazuta was Niskala. Upon the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, Torah was forgotten. We're celebrating that while Moshe Rabbeinu had yet to be Masakein, the Rashbi was Masakein whatever he needed to. The Reb Shimon Bar Yochai left over a student who was on par to him, who was equal to him. And finally, there's a difference between the sages of the Torah Shebachsav and the sages of the Torah Shebal Peh. There's a concept that the sages of the Torah Shebachsav, it's only Torah Shebachsav. We don't connect to it the same way. The way Rabbi Yaakov Hillel explains it, the Torah Shebachsav was given to Moshe b'chlalos. It was given to us as a tzibur. But the Torah Shebal Peh was given to Rabbi Akiva b'detail. That's why he's able to darshan and expound every nook and cranny of every letter in the Torah. So on the day of Rabbi Akiva's demise, which is Yom Kippur, we're suggesting it's somewhat of a celebration of the Patira of Rabbi Akiva. On the death of on the occasion of the demise of Shimon Bar Yochai, the Medrash says a special mechanism is activated, and that is Balei Asupais, that the Torah begins to pulsate through a Jew upon the demise of the Rebbe. So Lag BaOmer is the day of Kabbalas HaTorah. What Kabbalah HaTorah? The Kabbalah HaTorah Shebal Peh, the Kabbalah of the Sodos HaTorah, which entered the consciousness of the Jewish people upon the demise of Rishon Bar Yochai. So we should taka b'zoicha that on this great day, now that we've learned a little bit of the godless of the day and the godless of Rishon Bar Yochai, and it's Ki'ilu we're in Meiron, it's Ki'ilu we're at the Kever of Rishon Bar Yochai, we're all mispalel together. First of all, the Rebbe Shem should give all of us good health, to us, to all of our families. Rebbe Shem should give all of us simchas, nachas. Rebbe Shem should give malei kol mishal aseinu l'toiva. Rebbe Shem should give us siyata d'shmaya, begashmias, beruchnias. He should elevate all of us, b'Torah, b'yer shamayim, b'midas toivos, and we should all be zoicha to the Gula Shlema. Rishon Bar Yochai writes in Parshas Nasa in the Zohar, the most famous words he ever wrote. Uvegin da asidin Yisrael lemitam mehai ilani dechaye deiu sefer Zohar HaKadosh, that in the future Klal Yisrael will begin to taste on the Zohar, Yipkun min galusa barachame, the Zohar says we will be redeemed. So in the zechus of having a little bit of a flavor, the Rebbe Shem should be Meirim, Karen Yisrael, we should be Zoicha, to Gula Shlema, Afreilichen, Alichtigen, Lag BaOmer, Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.